There we go.
Good evening. My name is Patrick Floyd, and I am presenting to you from my home in Gulfport, Mississippi. We will be discussing the popular nationalism sweeping the United States. This will be a defensive argument for the validity of this study, titled In Defense of the Rise of Nationalism in the United States. Recently, we as a global community have experienced a rising nationalistic presence in the West. The election of Donald Trump to the office of President of the United States solidified the reality of nationalism as a growing political force. President Trump is not where this latest push for nationalism begins. It has been manifesting in direct view of the political classes. Understanding the importance of this moment in history is paramount and is currently being debated by scholars of all socioeconomic classes. One of the sources utilized for this study is a conference of the Baker Institute. At this gathering, scholarly minds came to understand what they perceived as a political phenomenon. I would argue that nationalism is no more a political phenomenon than the needs for social support programs or bargaining rights for labor unions. Nationalism is birthed by way of perceived realities and growing mistrust in government. If we are to assume that this wave of nationalism is organic, then we should wonder why such an obvious manifestation can form without the knowledge of a ruling political class. We must look upon the most recent examples of extreme nationalism and understand how this effect is achieved. The Germans and the United States utilized the effects of nationalism in order to prepare the population for war. Some Eastern European countries utilized this technique to set political boundaries and enforce the idea of national pride. These two examples from the early 20th century show the nation-state as the invisible hand bolstering nationalistic tendencies in order to achieve a desired political effect. From the historical examples, we can begin to understand why a ruling political class would be blindsided by an organic nationalistic movement. Indirectly, this would accuse the political classes of being somewhat asleep at the helm. But were they? Is this most recent onset of nationalism an organic occurrence? Let us consider the motivators for nationalistic tendencies in populations. Economic trends, religious diversification, shifts in demographic or immigration, changing political cultures that promote ideologies without perceived acknowledgement of dissenting parties. Europe and the United States have actively participated in global trade arrangements that have left segments of the less educated population financially disenfranchised. The common worker was promised more plentiful job opportunities and higher compensations with the onset of free trade agreements. Former President Bill Clinton stated, "This means jobs," when he signed the North American Free Trade Agreement into law. Since the time free trade was initiated up to present day, this has not been the reality for many people. In the United States, there exist regions of the country previously utilized for manufacture and now are vastly depopulated. This bolsters the perceived reality of disenfranchisement by the political elite for political gains unrelated to the electorate. As the blue-collar jobs vanished and the white-collar supervision was no longer needed in such high quantities, this brings more educated individuals into the fold of perceived disenfranchisement and bolsters the validity of perceived grievances. Religious diversification is usually seen as a byproduct of immigration. However, for the purposes of this argument, we will consider this effect to be a byproduct of a society moving more towards a secular ideology. Religion affects a society with unwritten common law. If the populace as a whole is of a similar religious ideology, then societal tendencies will eventually manifest itself into a common code of acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. When an elder population begins to deal with the political impact of a younger, more secular voting population, then morality will begin to be legislated. Pushback from the elder population will naturally occur, and a need to define what is and is not national identity will manifest in some form. Nationalism offers a bandwagon of sorts to join with other individuals who are unhappy with the status quo. Immigration changes the cultural landscape of regions inside of a nation. The great fear of existing members of a nation state is the unwillingness of immigrants to assimilate to the new culture. Immigrants usually allow for cheaper wages in the region they inhabit, and once again, the undereducated perceive a design slight by political leaders. Technology now allows for these groups of disenfranchisement to interact with one another and share their views on what is wrong with government and what needs to be corrected. As evidenced by the use of social media by former President Barack Obama and current President Donald Trump to affect political realities, we can see a pattern forming. The defining argument of this presentation is the realization that the current upswelling of nationalism isn't organic, but designed by those other than political and academic elites. Persuasive individuals can now harness the power of nationalism to effect the political change they desire. Before the internet, a great financial burden was required to affect public opinion by way of media outlets, either by direct influence, creating a television network, or purchasing airtime, which is incredibly expensive. Now, in the internet age, private citizens can grow a social media presence strong enough to vault themselves to the White House, referencing Donald Trump's active Twitter following. I believe it is justifiable to make this statement, as we now have an individual occupying the office of the presidency without one day of previous political experience. Many scholarly sources have been utilized to substantiate this argument for the origins of present-day nationalism. I'm by no means the first to attempt a scholarly paper on this subject. However, I believe I'm offering a unique perspective as it pertains to its origins. We have a large segment of citizens in first-tier countries who distrust their political parties and elected representatives. I believe we must attempt to understand this occurrence and seek unification. Division of this magnitude can only benefit those who value personal reward at the expense of the population and the nation-state itself. In closing, I will make the following remarks. We currently live in an extremely politically polarized time. At one point in the 1990s, the majority of private citizens presented their political views as equally liberal and conservative. This meant a higher likelihood that elected representatives will be compromise seekers, and I believe this is the road to a successful nation. Now we live in a time where independents are unwilling to discuss politics of any nature, as the mere presentation of independent views enrages the polarized populace. I believe we increase our liberty when we compromise and seek political solutions that have some measure of agreement from all affected parties. Sometimes the best political solution is to do nothing instead of fomenting political rebellion due to heavy-handed politics. Thank you for watching this presentation, and I hope you think this paper is worth writing.